Is Claudia Sheinbaum showing the left how to win? Plus, an Israeli refusenik joins us to talk about the Iran war. My name is David Griscom, and I am coming to y'all from Austin, Texas. I'm joined, as always, by my good friend and comrade and super producer, Mr. Matt Leck himself. How are you doing, friend?
I'm doing good, David. Happy Friday.
Yeah, man, I'm happy to do it. Thank you all for coming to our new time by popular demand. I thought we could have an early riser show, but I've been informed that leftists, they like to sleep a little bit. So we're going to be doing these in the afternoon, and I appreciate all of y'all tuning into the new time. We got a great show. I mean, we're going to be speaking with Iddo Elam in just a little bit, who is a refusenik from Israel, meaning that he refused to serve in the IDF, somebody who actually showing up for his convictions. We're going to talk about the anti-war movement in Israel, what his experience has been kind of seeing the ramp up of propaganda in support of this war and some of the more long-term prospects for an alternative future. It really was such an honor to be able to speak with him. Then we will be joined by our good friends, Kurt Hackbarth and Jose Luis Granados Ceja of Soberania. Jose Luis is also at Drop Site, and Kurt, you know from this magazine, Jacobin. Both of them are wonderful. We're going to be talking about Mexico and Claudia Sheinbaum. Always wonderful to talk about that. Something people are very interested in, and rightfully so. But before we get to all of this, Matt, we got to do a quick slimeball update. And we're going to be talking about none other than my good friend, state senator from the state of Texas, Ted Cruz, who tweeted this out. Graham Plattner, who is running a very strong working class anti-war campaign in Maine, tweeted out something against Senator Susan Collins, who was pushing more and more for war. Graham Plattner responded to her kind of warmonger tweet, saying, "I can assure you that your prayers didn't save my friends from dying in the last war you supported." Phenomenal message. Absolutely correct. Slithering up to the top of the pack was Ted Cruz, who said, "Were your friends wearing Nazi tattoos like you?" And a pretty disgusting thing, and surprising, frankly, even for somebody like Ted Cruz, to attack veterans and service members like that. Probably shouldn't be that surprising, I think, given Ted Cruz's regular ability to show himself as a total coward. But we do love a little bit of drama on the show, and Graham Plattner, I was happy to see, wrote a response in the Houston Chronicle. I'm opening it up in the morning, reading the news, and I see Graham Plattner's name come up, and I had to click it. Graham wrote a phenomenal op-ed in response to Ted Cruz saying, "Soldiers are dying in a war with Iran," and Ted Cruz jokes on Twitter. I highly suggest people read the whole op-ed. But I wanted to note here some of the better responses from Graham. Graham said back to Ted Cruz, "Ted Cruz simply has no clue. He knows nothing about service or sacrifice. When a historic winter storm hit Texas, he left the state to go sunbathing in Cancun. He knows nothing about courage. He now licks the boots of a man, President Donald Trump, who once slandered his wife. Cruz may be the only one openly mocking dead Marines on Twitter, but politicians on both sides of the aisle who have spent the past week practically salivating with excitement about war with Iran have shown immense disrespect and disdain to the young men and women who risk their lives overseas." Quote, quoting Trump, "When you go to war, some people die," as Trump put it. "This attitude disgusts me because it's never what happens to them, it's what happens to us. And to politicians like Cruz, we're just a laughing matter." And look, I think that that's put perfectly. I think that the warmongering we're getting from people like Ted Cruz, or hell, literal embodiments of Satan himself and Lindsey Graham, shows the complete contempt that this ruling political class has for everyday Americans, not least to in addition, obviously, to the Iranians who they're advocating the mass slaughter of. It's totally disgusting, and I think anybody with a conscience, opposes it and should recoil at it. And it's great to see Graham standing up for himself, especially in the major paper in the Houston area.
And the both sides, of anti-Semitism, because Ted Cruz is currently on the, which I agree with him, that Nick Fuentes is bad and anti-Semitic. And in the same breath, throwing this at Graham Plattner, it's just not going to work. The guy who has a skull and crossbones tattoo and zero other indication of anti-Semitism, in fact, a whole load of indication to the opposite effect. This is at the exact same time where the Conservative Manhattan Institute, cited by the New York Times here, only of those over 50, only 4% would say that their views are anti-Semitic. Under 50, 25 self-report their views of Republican men, self-report themselves as anti-Semitic. Just under 50, or 31%, identify their own views as racist. And the same survey from the Conservative Manhattan Institute said that a majority of Republican men under 50 think the Holocaust either didn't happen or it was exaggerated.
Yeah, I don't know. Cruz, maybe look in the mirror. But I don't know. Self-reflection is not that guy's strong suit. Sucking up is. And he's a total coward, and the state of Texas will be better off when he is far away from power. Folks, we got a lot to get to, so we're going to dive right into it. I do just want to note two quick things before we do. One, subscribe to the magazine. We have a great link below for y'all to be able to do that. The new Teen Jacobin edition is going to be a lot of fun. Y'all are going to like it. Second, we have big plans for this YouTube channel, not just with Matt and I, but with others. Jacobin is really looking to kind of expand what we're doing over here. If you've seen some of the wonderful shorts that we've been putting together, we want to do more of that. And to be able to do that, it would really help us out a lot. If y'all can subscribe to this channel, both subscribe and also signing up for those subscriptions. We've been seeing more people signing up on the YouTube subscriptions for us. That money does help us out tremendously. So please consider, helping us out as we continue to expand. There's going to be a lot of really exciting things happening on this channel, and we can only do it with the wonderful support of all of y'all's, of our listeners. So please, consider doing that. But yeah, let's jump over to these conversations, Matt, because I think they're really important. Really, really honored to be able to do them. Thank you for tuning in to the Jacobin Show. We'll be right back. And we are back with the Jacobin Show. I'm really excited and honored to be joined today by Ido Elam, who is a refusenik in Israel. And we're going to talk a little bit about the war in Iran and also what's kind of going on the ground in Israel. But first off, thank you so much for coming on the program, and maybe to kind of introduce you to the audience. Could you share your perspective on the IDF and why you chose not to engage in mandatory service in the IDF?
Yeah, thank you for having me, David. I chose to not join the IDF a long time ago. When I was 15 already, it was clear to me that I will not serve the IDF. It took a while to understand that what is right for me is also to publicly refuse and go to prison for that. The reason is that I see the occupation of the Palestinian people here in the West Bank and in Gaza as something that it immediately hurts millions of Palestinians, but also for me as a teenager was like this block in my way of any real change here, any real better future. I truly believe that the occupation everything can be traced back to the occupation in terms of in general here, even like paying the bills, like everything here is worse off because of the occupation. And when I turned 15, 16, I finally understood the magnitude of the occupation. I met Palestinians for the first time. I started being active against the occupation. I went to protests. And once I had these personal connections with Palestinians, it was clear to me that I cannot be a part of the system that oppresses them. When I was 18, at the end of 2024, I refused to join the IDF. I was sent to military prison, like many of my comrades in the Mesarvot network, of which we help through this process of refusing, which can be quite isolating.
Mm-hmm. before we get into like the recent events, I mean, could you talk about that, that experience of, of refusing, just kind of like for you personally and just generally socially for people who refuse to participate in the IDF? What is that kind of experience like in Israel? How are people who refuse to serve treated in the country?
To put it simply, I mean, we are treated as traitors. It's basically the deadliest sin you can do in Israeli society. Israeli society is completely based on the military, both career-wise and education-wise, but also culturally. So imagine that everything that we grew up on, whether in school, whether in movies, whether in music, revolves around the military. And if you don't go to the military, it might as well be saying, I am not Israeli. I am not a part of the game. So like I said, I decided to refuse even before October the 7th and even before I actually was supposed to enlist. So many people throughout my teenage years hated me publicly. I got yelled at, spat at, wishes of death, of ailment, all that you can imagine. And that only grew and grew after the 7th of October and only grew and grew once I actually refused. Till this day, if you're a refuser, you get daily death threats online. You get it's really just very isolating. It's really just imagine that you try and protest or walk in the street, somebody recognizes you, yells at you, and it's quite hard sometimes, but at the same time, for us, it's the only option because we cannot see ourselves completely just whitewashing the occupation and completely just not stepping up to this huge era that we're in now with the genocide in Gaza.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly the moral thing to do. And I wanted to kind of ask you now, bringing us up to kind of current day, how you're viewing what's going on right now. I mean, I don't have to lay everything on the table. Everybody knows, the United States and Israel are now engaged in a massive bombing campaign in Iran. This war and conflict has now expanded into Lebanon. I mean, as you're sitting here watching this, kind of tell us what your experience is seeing this on the ground as somebody, and also, your kind of perspective on how this relates to the ongoing, to the genocide and the occupation of Palestinians.
Almost 2 weeks ago now, my government decided to go on this war of aggression in Iran. To us, it was immediately clear that it will be horrible, both for Palestinians and Iranians and everybody that is caught in the middle. We have seen now that we have killed, I think, more than 1,000 people in Iran, civilians, more than 600 people in Lebanon, and in the past week and a half, at least 7 Palestinians were murdered by the IDF and settlers in the West Bank. I mean, this is clear that this is just one more step in the general plan of Netanyahu and his right-wing government of destabilizing the Middle East, destabilizing large Arab powers, or in this case, Muslim powers. And in terms of what it says about the occupation, it says that the settlers and the IDF have clear range to do whatever they want in the West Bank. We can bomb Gaza and nobody will hear about it. We can bomb and enter Lebanon and people will still only talk about Khamenei and about Iran, while this fog of war is covering everything. General public here are absolutely supporting this war. I think a clear majority of Jewish Israelis support this war, and it really shows. I mean, we have protested now a few times and gotten massive backlash both from media and people just walking around us. And it's quite hard because one side, sure, I understand that people have a hard time right now. I mean, just 2 days ago, we had a night with 6 rocket sirens waking us up in the middle of the night. It's quite hard to feel compassion sometimes to these people that you see on the other side of the world, almost as Israelis perceive Iranians. But at the same time, we put ourselves in this situation. We have to resist this war because Israel put us in this situation. And that is what we are trying to say to the general public. Like, listen, it's not only bad for Iran. It's not only bad for Lebanon. It's not only bad for Palestinians getting ethnically cleansed in the West Bank. For us, it is bad. Our government does not care about our safety, and this will not bring any security for us.
I mean, could you talk a little bit about what the experience is like? I mean, with the kind of response from Iran to Israel, what that has been like for you and for other people. I mean, because this is unique, for example, compared to Gaza, in the sense that Iran is like a real proper functioning state with a military.
Yeah.
I mean, could you just talk about like the sense of like actually being brought into a war with, if not an equivalent power, at least a power that has the capacity to do significant damage?
Yeah, totally. I mean, what we have known throughout my life, at least, I'm quite young, but we have known only small rockets fired from Hamas and the Islamic Jihad in Gaza, and small rockets fired from Hezbollah. This is nothing. It's nothing compared to Iran. We are talking now. We already know how it is, because in June we had a very short war with Iran, but it still killed many people and it still injured many people. And these ballistic missiles that are fired on Israel do a lot of damage. It's quite clear. I live in Tel Aviv. A few rockets already fell here because this is the main point of target. Obviously, it's the main point of target because the largest Israeli military and intelligence base is literally in the middle of Tel Aviv, near homes, near public malls. Just the same thing that we say that Iran and Hamas do, we ourselves do here. So, the hypocrisy is quite funny at sometimes. So yeah, I know people that have lost their homes. I know people that have been injured by these rockets, because in the end of the day, this high-tech power that we try to convince ourselves that we have is not enough for true all-out regional war. We are not prepared for that, and apparently Netanyahu does think that we're prepared for that, but obviously he doesn't consider us as an issue. He thinks that a few Israelis dying here and there is fine. So yeah, I mean, it has been quite scary sometimes, but mostly very tiring, because every time there is a rocket, even one rocket fired towards Israel, we receive a siren on our phones, which is literally, you cannot stop it from happening. It's like an emergency alert. And that wakes you up in the middle of the night. That stops you in the middle of, let's say, doing this interview. It might happen. And this has been daily. So you can imagine that school and work has stopped. It's basically full on lockdown since the war started. And the few times that we did go out to protest or to do some community work, the police repressed us, and even that was not allowed, because they say that being outside in the public is dangerous.
I mean, I wanted to kind of hear a little bit about the anti-war movement as it exists in Israel. I mean, could you talk about some of the work that y'all are doing, and also if you could, talk a little bit about the social and political base, for that movement. I mean, who are the people who are showing up at these? Are there political organizations that are organizing, some of these activities? I mean, just give us a sense of the anti-war movement right now in Tel Aviv and Israel, at large.
Yeah, so I'm active in a few groups, both the Mesarvot network, which is a network of conscientious objectors and people who support conscientious objectors, We basically guide people through refusing to join the military. We have been taking action in a few protests in the past few weeks, together with many other organizations like the Anti-Occupation Bloc, the Communist Youth, the Hadash Party, which I'm a part of as well, the Jewish Palestinian Socialist Party. We have protested a few times in central Tel Aviv. Also, there was a protest in Jerusalem, also in Haifa. In Tel Aviv, we basically protested for 5 minutes, let's say a few dozen people, and were immediately both ran on by fascists who came to protest against us. The police did nothing to protect us or our right to protest, and within 5 to 10 minutes, we were also violently dispersed from the public square. They gave the reason of basically you are endangering yourselves and others because being together in a public square, if a rocket attack happens, you will be in danger. I don't know how getting punched and shoved helps our public safety, but sure. We stood with signs saying arms embargo now and stop empire. They immediately tried to take those signs away. Once we were dispersed, we were still ran after by fascists while the police just vanished. And this just goes to show that, one of the protesters were arrested. At one of the protests, a friend of mine was arrested and then unlawfully just strip searched at the police station for no apparent reason, just to humiliate us. And this all just goes to show that they don't really care about public safety. They don't really care about our right to protest, our right to express ourselves. This democracy that we live in only cares about protecting the status quo, protecting the government. Besides that, within the Hadash party, this week I also went to do some community work with Palestinians in Jaffa, just southern of Tel Aviv here. We cleaned out some public shelters because the government does not supply enough protection for Palestinian citizens of Israel. If you see the statistics, a vast majority of Palestinian citizens of Israel do not have public shelter in their cities and villages, while basically all Jewish cities have many, many public shelters. In Jaffa, the situation is quite bad because many public shelters are ran down, dirty, and are not treated well. So we try our best to help these people protect themselves, because at the end of the day, these Palestinians who are citizens of the same country that I am a citizen of are treated completely different and are thrown into this war for and it's very different than how I was thrown into this war, because obviously their interests are not even considered a little bit.
Yes. No, I mean, it is a total hypocrisy, and I think this is important stuff to continue to highlight. I have 2 more questions for you before I let you go. And the first one is if you could talk about how you mentioned how, there is a lot of popular support, for this conflict, and you think that that's probably going to increase, as the war continues. Could you talk about how this conflict is being sold to the people in Israel? Because, in the United States, Trump has basically said 3 or 4 different things that are all in conflict with one another, which makes, even seeing an end to this conflict feel further and further away, because if you have goals that just, are incongruent with one another, when will you kind of end this conflict? Could you talk about in Israel how this war is being sold, and if you think it will continue to be as popular as the fighting continues? Will there be a rally around the flag? Just give us a little bit of what's going on the ground there.
I definitely think that the same confusion that you in the US are getting, we are also getting. It's quite unclear why we started this war. There was a lot of talk before the war about maybe it will happen, but we didn't really understand why now and what is the objective. The general media here, which is completely complicit in the government's actions, is selling it as just a war to completely topple the Iranian government. Nobody is saying how. Nobody is asking, okay, how is bombing a country again and again and again going to topple the government? But this is the general sentiment. Besides that, we also do not know how long is this war going to be. The Israeli defense minister yesterday said there is no time limit on this war. Basically, we'll continue till we want to. And once again, unless the US somehow deploys troops in Iran, I cannot see how we will end this war in the objective of toppling the government. I do see at the start of the war, right on the first few days, a lot of people completely rallied around the flag, completely rallied around the idea of the war, including liberals, including opposition leaders here, including Yair Golan, who is the head of the Labour Party, or now called the Democrats. All of the people in politics and in general supported this action. Now, 2 weeks into it, you do see some people start to say, okay, but maybe we don't trust Bibi and Trump to actually do something here. Maybe we should not trust this guy that we have been protesting against for 3 years to do a regional war in Iran, because we don't know what is his interests here. And I do truly believe that besides the general geopolitical reasons of dismantling the Iranian government, or at least creating chaos within Iran, I do believe that Netanyahu definitely thinks about himself. We have seen time and time again Trump lobbying the Israeli president to give Netanyahu a pardon on his corruption cases, and I think that this is definitely another factor here. But yeah, I truly hope that within 2 months into this war, if it continues, we'll see the center of Israeli public go against this war, because now it's almost talking to a wall. I mean, truly, they have been sold this idea and they are totally eating it up. And it's quite sad to see that people that, you could agree with on some things a month ago, and you can somehow lobby to maybe talk a bit about Palestinians, talk a bit about Netanyahu, now are rallying for this guy that, like I said, 2 months ago, they were protesting against. So I really do hope that we'll see a shift in Israeli public opinion, but this happens overnight. I mean, honestly, Israel is shifting every day and every week on all issues, all the time.
Well, I mean, I just wanted to ask you, how stable do you think, Israel is right now as a government? I mean, obviously, their support for some of these activities, but it's also something that's maintained with a lot of violence, not just abroad, but internally. I mean, you're talking about, the police actions against y'all for engaging in free speech activity. I mean, how does Israel as a project, as a government, how stable does it feel to you in a moment like this?
I think that the government didn't play out this action very well. I think that in the immediate response that we're still in, yes, there is more support for Netanyahu, and yes, more people are staying quiet on the war and on the different issues that have been brought up in recent years. But in the long run, this will not play out good for Netanyahu. First, because I don't believe that he will topple the Iranian government, and I think that he will fail in what he's trying to sell us. But also because, like I said, the price to be paid by Israelis is quite high. You see that that like hundreds of people now have lost their homes because of not even direct hits, but shrapnel hits and blast from rocket fire. And you see that I think already a dozen Israelis have been killed by rocket fire. This, if it goes on for months and months, will make this war very unpopular, or at least the way that Netanyahu operates this war will be unpopular. And I think that the problem with Israeli politics is that all of the Zionist opposition to Netanyahu is saying the same thing. I mean, they are supporting him. They are right next to him. The leader of opposition, Yair Lapid, who is supposed to be a liberal, is saying this is a just war. This is a great war. We needed to go out on this action. And while I disagree with Netanyahu on many things, on this I'm with him. And this is a horrible thing to say in an election year that we are in, because if you support Netanyahu in this, in the geopolitics of it, so why will I vote for you? I mean, Netanyahu has been here for 25 years and he is doing great things, so we won't replace him. There have been talks of doing the election right after this war in June, because the election is supposed to be in October and Netanyahu can basically disband the Knesset and put it earlier. And I think it will be quite difficult for opposition leaders to create a government if we go to elections right after this quote unquote victory of killing Khamenei and at least somehow hurting the Iranian government. And we don't know. I think that Israel is now shifting a bit to maybe also dismantling Hezbollah, because the Lebanese government wants to do that as well. And if they basically take the arms of Hezbollah, it will also be a very big win for the Netanyahu government, at least as it seems to the public.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're just trying to see how much they can grab. Before I let you go, I have a kind of a personal question, if you don't mind. You know, the work that you've been doing both in refusing, you know, in refusing to serve in the IDF, and now standing up against the war, you know, you face a kind of a lot of personal consequence for it, a lot of social consequence for it. And I just wanted to hear, you know, from you, it's like, why is this work and kind of standing up with your convictions so important to you, and what kind of keeps you going when it feels like you might be up against a force that might be insurmountable?
Wow. It's kind of the question I ask myself every day. Honestly, sometimes I think it's just habit at this point. I've been protesting and organizing against occupation for almost 5 years now. For me, it started by just going to like political stuff, just learning about politics, about socialism. I joined the Young Communist League when I was 14. Nowadays, honestly, it's a bit of habit. It's a bit of just, this is my life now. This is what I do. And I truly believe that if I don't do activism, if I don't fight the occupation, fight the Israeli government, then what am I doing here? I mean, why should I stay here with the rocket fire, with the occupation, with the horrible news of more and more death around me, if I'm not doing anything about it? It's personal for me now. I mean, I have Palestinian friends that live in the West Bank. I have Palestinian friends that live with me in Israel, but are treated differently, treated horribly by the state. And if I don't do anything, I will just leave, because I truly believe that this is my connection now to this land. This is my connection to my friends here, my comrades here. And every week I just do it again, because I truly believe that if we don't do it together with Palestinians, if we try and do some reform instead of petitioning specifically for the complete end of the occupation and complete end of injustice here, then we'll just, wither away as a left base, and we'll wither away more and more till fascism will just set here. And and besides that, I quite don't. I don't really want to move to the United States or Europe while things are currently happening there. So sometimes I actually say, this place is quite great. But yeah, this is just the land that I know, and I truly believe that this is my home, and this is the home of the indigenous Palestinian people that deserve to enjoy it just as much as I do.
Well, I really appreciate you coming and joining us on the Jacobin Show, my friend. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David.
And friends, we are back continuing this international episode of the Jacobin Show. I am joined by return guests, my good friends, Kurt Hackbarth and Jose Luis Granados Ceja. Kurt Hackbarth is a Jacobin contributor. Jose Luis is also, in addition to Soberania, is at Drop Site now, which we're all very excited about. And between the two of them, they have the best podcast in English on Mexican politics, Soberania. Thank you all so much for coming on the program.
Thanks for having us again, David.
Of course. I was going to say we might be the only one, but that's not true. We're the only weekly English show, but there's a new one called the Mexico Political Economist, something like that. That's bi-weekly. So we have some competition now.
Well, y'all continue to I mean, have y'all hit 100 episodes yet?
We're hitting 100 episodes precisely this week.
Wonderful.
In a question of days.
Well, congratulations on that. People should subscribe. We will have links below. Look, we got a lot to talk about, and maybe we can start with this clip about this kind of like debt forgiveness, this mortgage forgiveness that's going on in Mexico. Matt, if you could play this clip here of Claudia, it's something that I think got a lot of people, even in the United States, very excited about Mexico.
¿Cuánto pediste prestado para una vivienda? Me dijo 600,000 pesos. ¿Cuánto debías? 800,000 pesos. ¿Y cuánto habías pagado? Más de 1,000,000 de pesos. Bueno, ¿quién entiende eso? Nadie. Se entiende que haya intereses cada año, pero ¿cómo es posible que se pague 2 veces la vivienda y uno no ha acabado de pagar? Pero además debe más de lo que pidió prestado, porque los créditos fueron diseñados como un negocio para unos cuantos, no fueron diseñados como un derecho del pueblo de México para tener vivienda. Cuando entramos dije, a ver cómo está lo de los créditos del Fobiste, cómo está lo de los créditos del Infonavit, y la gran mayoría de los créditos eran impagables. ¿Por qué? Por pura injusticia, no porque no se trabajara para pagarlos. No, el problema es cómo fueron diseñados los créditos para beneficiar a los que hicieron las casas, no para el derechohabiente. Bueno, entonces dijimos, ¿cuántos créditos están así? En el Fobiste son 400,000 créditos impagables, injustos. ¿Saben en el Infonavit cuántos eran? Cerca de 5
I think that's good there. I mean, look, for people who aren't familiar, why don't we first talk about what this is announcing and why it is so exciting?
Sure. So, actually, we talked quite a bit about that in this week's episode of Soberania. And I'm really glad we were talking just before the program started that these kind of news pieces about Mexico are finally cutting through in the United States in the U.S. left, right? We were with you guys in Left Reckoning for years, kind of doing trench work. They're saying, hey, something interesting is happening in Mexico. And all of a sudden we're seeing almost like the sea change. And all of a sudden, Claudia Sheinbaum's become like this online pop star. And I'm happy to see it. I'm happy to see it because this is something we've been trying to say for years. There's something worth seeing here. And housing is one of those areas, right? That piece in Newsweek about the million new homes that the Sheinbaum administration is building. There's actually lowballing. They're building 1.8 million new homes over the course of her administration, is part of the Morena coalition's attempt to really get at the housing issue, which is obviously an international issue, and Mexico is obviously no exception. Right. And it's interesting that a lot of people in the United States were seeing what we just saw in the video and making comparisons to 2008, because the way those housing loans were set up in the neoliberal era, especially in the Vicente Fox government, was very similar to subprime mortgages. You would, offer mortgages to people with a low initial price. The mortgage would just go up and up and up and up. Not only the problem was the mortgage itself, but that the construction of these homes were, outsourced to very shifty, shady construction companies that built substandard housing way outside of cities, way outside of transportation areas, way outside of work opportunities, just dumping them on municipalities that really weren't equipped to handle them. And you go back to them now, some 20 years later, and a lot of them are just people have abandoned them. People just had to walk away. So the program began under López Obrador was to reform the whole model. First of all, stop people getting evicted. Stop the evictions, first of all, or stop the bleeding. And then from there, go into these loans and go kind of case by case and say, which of these need to be totally written off? Which of them can be written down? Which of them were, how can we make these work for people? And, have this to go on. Meanwhile, the Sheinbaum administration actually passed a constitutional amendment allowing the Federal Housing Authority in Infonavit to build public housing directly and not have to outsource to these private builders, a lot of them whom subsequently and conveniently went belly up so that people could then not go after them for, this shoddy housing and all these kind of subprime style mortgages. So I think what's really gotten people excited is that Sheinbaum has said, we're going to, write down or write off these bad mortgages. We want to keep people in homes. And not only that, we're going to build this 1.8 million units of public housing near city centers, near downtown areas, near work opportunities, near transportation centers. They're going to be divided between people who are in the formal economy and have, their, benefits, but also people who are in the informal economy, which are still half of Mexican workers, earning between 1 and 2 minimum wages. And for that bracket, they're going to be interest-free mortgages. How about that?
Wow.
The only thing I would add to that is that, for example, in some places here in Mexico, for example, the eastern portion that's kind of next to Mexico City in the state of Mexico, it's a region that's been historically marginalized, that has obviously dealt with a lot of insecurity, poverty, lack of infrastructure. So some of the housing policy is actually kind of folded into these broader strategies that are aimed at actually improving the quality of life of people, especially in these areas that were sort of the areas that are most representative of the social abandonment that happened during the neoliberal period, right? There, like so many other countries, there was a virtual kind of abandonment in terms of housing and investment and left up to the market. But in some places, it was also kind of improvised housing, people just kind of taking over plots of land and building on top of it. And so you have like this strategy, like I said, where they're building healthcare, hospitals, improving education services, improving transit, making it easier for people to come in and out so it's not a 2-hour trek. All of this kind of reflects the social priorities of this government. And I think the most interesting thing is precisely that, how many people kind of reflected that on their own experience of saying, gosh, I wish we had this. And it happened actually very recently with a similar but different issue, which is I never expected this tweet to take off. All I did was basically put out there the government strategy to keep gas prices low right now at the pump, given the huge uptick in costs that is happening as a result of the U.S. and Israeli aggression against Iran and the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. And so basically the key thing there is they reach an agreement with all of the different gasoline operators, that sort of the pumps that you can find where you go and fuel up, to keep the price of gas for regular gas frozen at 24 pesos a liter. And they're able to do this because we have a state-owned oil company that can offer them discounts on the wholesale price. And so you can see the importance of how different aspects of policy kind of comes together to what? Make life more affordable and more enjoyable.
And just to round out very quickly the housing issue, there's also a communications aspect to it. We've talked a lot in previous episodes, on previous opportunities, about the morning press conference, the daily morning press conference, the mañanera, right? Where the president takes questions for upwards of 2 hours or more every single day. Wednesdays is dedicated to housing. So you see these videos every Wednesday of somebody getting a new house, or somebody getting the keys to their new apartment, or actually they're showing what the apartments or what these new developments look like. Right? And that's very important, as, those of us who are in this know it's not just the policy itself, it's how you communicate it. And I think it's not lost on a lot of people in the world that right now, as the U.S. and Israel are deliberately targeting and destroying civilian housing and killing the people inside of them, Mexico is building housing.
Yeah. No, I think that's a very important and humanistic point here. I mean, we can talk about the depravity of the U.S. Israel war on Iran, but one thing that people have been noting here is just how much money we've been wasting on murdering people when we continue to have all of these kind of crises for everyday working class folks in this country. And it's always just amazing how easy it is for them to kind of, turn on the money spigot when it comes to killing folks versus feeding and housing people. But I want to talk a little bit about, this continued, success that we're seeing in Mexico with Claudia, and kind of, start looking at some of the kind of lessons and perspectives that y'all have. I remember when Claudia was kind of taking over from Amla, right? When the torch, forgive the metaphors, kind of getting passed over to her, there was all these doubts like, does she have the same kind of charisma as he does? Does she have the same kind of stamina? Is she too boring, too wonky, all this kind of stuff? But as we were noting before the show started, it is still amazing to me. It makes me very happy. But I've just been shocked to see how much continued interest there is in her and in Mexico. If you make a post about Claudia Sheinbaum, it's very likely to go viral on social media. People are very excited about it. And this is a great, shift and change versus most of the other stuff you see on social media. But it does kind of beg the question for me is like, why do y'all think there's so much interest in what's happening in Mexico?
I think people are desperate for good news. I was just in Canada last week. I was invited to participate in the Progress Summit, which is hosted by the Broadband Institute, to talk about a panel about the, defense of democracy. And I had a certain idea in terms of what I was going to talk about, but I actually got there on Wednesday. My presentation wasn't until Thursday. And just kind of those handful of conversations, it seemed to me obvious that people were desperate for some good news. They were anxious. They were thirsty to hear that positive things can happen in this world, and they can happen by wielding political power. So I actually changed my speech, my intervention for this. And afterwards, I couldn't tell you how many people found me to say that was the best thing that we've heard thus far today. Because that's what they want. They want to hear that it is possible. And even under adverse circumstances. One thing that I think is worth remembering is that I saw some chatter online about, how people outside of the United States don't understand how complicated and how hard it is. And the bipartisan system is just so difficult. I mean, it was the same thing here. We had a one-party dictatorship. Not only was there the need to create a new political party once, but twice, where there was literally a campaign of assassinations against social leaders, some of the key figures in the PRD for a while there. Of course, it's difficult, but it's always worth it. And I think when people see that there is a payoff, that's where they get excited. And I think there's a lot of parallels too. Mexico sometimes feels really far away for some people because of the cultural barrier, the language barriers, but it's not actually, I was telling people it took me only 4 hours to fly in here. If you want to come down to Mexico City and see for yourself, you could do it on a weekend. It's even closer if you're in somewhere like in Texas, right? So I think most of it.
We had you down here, right, Dave? I hope you have
Yeah, it might be there again soon. No, I mean, it's easier for me to get there than New York in many ways,
Yeah. And so, having an example to point to where that people can actually see, and it's been long enough as well too, where you can see the infrastructure projects that actually exist now, right? The political consciousness amongst the population that is widespread and deeply penetrated in society. All of these things can change rather quickly once you're able to actually secure those key wins, act on those wins, and deliver results to people and be able to build on top of them.
Yeah, I would add to that López Obrador himself said with regards to Claudia, watch out, because compared to her, I'm a fresa. He said, I'm bougie compared to her. And we've seen that. We've seen her steel will in a lot of cases over the course of this first year and such. Not, least of which, holding off Trump with one hand while trying to, continue Mexican development with the other. Like, yes, right? That's no small thing. And we see that now with not only the on-again, off-again tariff threats over the course of the first year, but now the whole shield of the Americas ridiculousness, right? Trump's strangling Cuba, with Lindsey Graham saying after Iran, Cuba's next. The boat bombings, which have now turned into on-land bombings in Ecuador, right, with the acquiescence of Daniel Noboa. Dangerous times. And she's shown a very steel but also very calm will in holding that off with one hand while advancing the programs that we've been talking about in another. I also had a tweet that went viral about the completion of the Insurgente train, right, which connects Toluca from Mexico City. It's a beautiful train. Before Mexico City and Toluca, about, sometimes 2.5 hours, just in a very clogged highway. You have to cross mountains to get there. And now you have this beautiful highway that crosses the mountains and gets right into Mexico City, connecting into the subway and such. These are simple ideas, right? And actually, this was begun before by a previous administration that botched the construction. So it was left to the Morena and the 4T government to finish the project, right? They're simple ideas, but it reminds people, it harks back to an idea when, government was at least on your side, minimally, with regards to things like, right, infrastructure, with regards to housing. Sheinbaum is now making the steps to get Mexico to universal health care. Mexico has a very fragmented health system where people who are in the formal economy go to one system in the private sector, public sector workers go to another system, informal economy workers go to an inferior system. So she's trying to unify that where anybody can go to any hospital and any public network. And everybody's going to get, every single citizen will get an individual health card with their health records. So that's portable. So you can go to something that's not, in a different public network and still have it be valid. And I think one more thing, too, she's also had to handle a very hostile media environment. I think we talked in a previous show about this bogus Gen Z march, right? And all of these ideas of trying to turn that into a color revolution. Recently, there was an operation to take out one of the world's most wanted criminals, El Mencho, from the cartel Jalisco Nueva Generación. It was a very successful operation, although a number of Mexican military members lost their lives in it. Because it's always Mexico that puts the bodies, right, in these kinds of situations. Again, there was this huge fake news campaign saying that Guadalajara, an airplane was on fire and there were shootouts in the airport and that tourists were being kidnapped and Puerto Vallarta was totally in flames, right? And without denying that stuff happened that day, it was nothing like the fake news campaign that made it from, jump the border from Mexico to accounts like Laura Loomer and such to try to destabilize Mexico. Right. So that's when you see kind of the steel will of Claudia Sheinbaum, who I think speaks. AMLO is the great communicator of the Mexican public, the great communicator of the Mexican public. Everything kind of, he oozed Mexicanness out of every pore. But Claudia Sheinbaum, a woman, a little younger, English speaker, studied in the U.S., but is also deeply rooted in Mexico, I think has that ability to communicate to a global North public in a very unique way.
Well, I want to kind of, I want to come back to the domestic stuff in Mexico and maybe get into some of the future and the political challenges. But maybe let's pull the U.S. out for a second. I know that's hard to do, but I was kind of curious to hear how y'all have seen her and Mexico, how they're relating to the rest of the Americas, right? Not with Trump, but just like other countries in the region in terms of, there's been some major shifts. Obviously, there has been a kind of growth in right-wing power, particularly in South America. I mean, how has Mexico been kind of playing on that larger kind of international stage without the United States at the table?
I want to say I'm really glad the way you phrased that, the growth of right-wing power in Latin America, because a lot of people think because right-wing governments are being elected here and there, that there's somehow some kind of continental shift happening. And I think that's actually being overstated. Certainly, there have been some important victories for the right in the region, but we take a look at the shield of the Americas, right? I did the calculation. It's not even a fifth of the population of Latin America was represented there. And I think it's being deliberately overstated because, Kurt and I were recently in Colombia, and outside of Colombia, and I think in some ways it mirrors Mexico during the AMLO years, it's hard to get an appreciation of just how their project is going, right? Is it successful? Is it penetrating society? Are they advancing? Well, we just recently saw the congressional elections where Pacto Histórico, Historic Pact, this coalition today political party made up of all various left-wing forces in Colombia, actually grew. And it shows that there's not necessarily a right-wing trend. There is a growth of right-wing power, yes. And what we were seeing actually when it comes to Mexico is now I think, finally, a determined effort to make more connections. So just yesterday, Petro, Colombian president, and Claudia Sheinbaum had a phone call where we discussed some bilateral issues, but also regional issues about the need to kind of have a collective position about the instability in the world, the threat to peace that the U.S.-Israeli aggression is representing, the effect it's going to have on markets. We know that Claudia is set to travel to Brazil soon for a high-level meeting with Lula da Silva. So, these are the kinds of things that I think show there is now a more serious appreciation for the need to build more relationships to our south, as opposed to, as you say, all of the attention being focused on the north. And it's not even Mexico, right? Like we're seeing, of all people, Mark Carney, the banker, also exploring the necessity of this. I know you said not to talk too much about the U.S., but it is forcing the Mexico and the Mexican political establishment to really have to reckon with what it means to diversify their relationships. And I think there is a perfect scenario in front of Mexico right now to build relationships with the west of Latin America, to play a leading role. Mexico can be somewhat insular, inward looking. And, I mentioned this fact to Guillaume Long when I saw him, and he's like, yeah, it's not unusual. That's the case with these larger countries. We smaller countries always have to kind of look abroad. But we're seeing that change. We're seeing that change because of the reality of the situation on the ground. And I'm really encouraged. And I think the challenge will be how to make it into concrete action, right? Claudia talked about publishing a joint statement, and that's good. We should obviously always defend more calls for peace in this world, but there has to be more to it, right? There was a moment there that the Union of South American Republics, UNASUR, was debating creating kind of a defense council or a sort of a regional defense pact in the face of global instability, and I think arguably above all, threats by U.S. imperialism to the region. That proposal fell off the table. But if that had happened, would we have seen the kidnapping of Maduro? And given the aggressiveness of the United States, doesn't it make more sense for us to really start to think about what does collective defense look like? Or even around commercial things. One of the things I've always been really kind of beating the drum on is that there are major oil producers in this region. Mexico, Colombia, and Brazil together are serious actors when it comes to global energy markets. If they were able to get together and create an OPEC-like structure for Latin America, they wouldn't be able to tell countries like Mexico, hey, you can't sell oil to Cuba, because we would say, all right, we'll turn off the spigot for everybody if you're going to try to tell us what to do with our own natural resources. So it's all very good. The intentions are there. What's missing is concrete action.
Yeah, I would add to that, if you watch Soberania, we've been consistently quite critical of Mexican foreign policy over this time, trying to give a balanced view on it, for being a little too timid at times. Within what Mexico considers to be its sphere of influence, which is South America, you've seen some bold foreign policy, right? Remember, AMLO sent in a plane to rescue Evo Morales after the 2019 coup. AMLO called a spade with regards to Peru and the destitution of Pedro Castillo and the jailing, and called it a coup when other people weren't calling it a coup. And actually, Castillo was on his way to the Mexico embassy to get asylum when he was intercepted and jailed, and remains in jail to this day. So we see that kind of policy with regards to Latin America, right? To the point that Peru broke off diplomatic relations with Mexico, and so did Daniel Noboa's Ecuador, because they were upset about what the Mexico's, I think, very forthright stance. On the world stage, I think Mexico hasn't yet found its footing. I think Jose Luis is right. It's an insular society in some ways, and understandably, but Mexico is the world's 12th largest economy now. Just just about to leave, or having just leapfrogged Spain, and I think it's still trying to grasp what the implications are of being the world's 12th largest economy, sharing a common border with the United States, right? Which is kind of difficult geographical circumstances, to say the least. And on my recent Jacobin piece, I talked about the case of Cuba, which is, I think, symbolic of the conundrums that the Sheinbaum administration is facing. Mexico has had historically a policy of solidarity with Cuba that has cut across administrations. And this goes back to the beginning of the Cuban Revolution. Mexico had relations with Cuba, even when, a time when other Latin American nations were cutting them off. Mexico was kind of that line to Cuba for so many years. Back channel relationship in selling oil and such. So when Venezuela was forced to stop selling oil to Cuba, Mexico stepped into the breach and increased its oil sales. So, Trump's recent threat of, tariffs against anyone that provides oil to Cuba, obviously the Supreme Court struck that down, but we'll see where that is, was obviously directed at Mexico. Right. And Mexico has backed off on selling oil to Cuba for the moment, and they're sending other humanitarian aid. Many of us believe that Mexico should continue to send oil to Cuba, but it's not as easy as that when you know that, a lot of the U.S. Navy that isn't off killing people in the Middle East is parked in the Caribbean, and that could set off an opportunity for, a Mexican liner to be seized or drone bombed or whatever else, and then use that as a breach, as an opening to bomb Mexico on land, because you're dealing with a, psychopathic, out of control administration. So how do you handle that? Together with kind of the historical reserve of Mexican foreign policy. So not easy, right? But here we are in the world, right?
Yeah. No, I mean, it's definitely a tense relationship, and I think it definitely takes a lot of skill to be able to navigate that in a way that, one, upholds and protects human rights, but also protects you from this great threat to the north.
And at the same time, Mexico is in the midst of this, revision of the free trade agreement, which is happening right now as we speak, right? And of course, Trump is demanding everything from Mexico, even to opening up its energy sector, to have basically no relationship with China at all, and to basically allow the United States veto power over foreign investment in Mexico. Just some small asks from the U.S. on that.
Yeah. No, of course. This is what always happens. There's too much to get to, so we're going to have you on very soon to talk about Morena and Claudia, and kind of get a sense of how long and how viable we find this transformation to be, any kind of cracks and things like that. But before I let y'all go, as people know, in my book about kind of Texas's radical history, there's a lot of cross-border solidarity, and the Texas radicals and socialists were very much influenced by what was happening in the Mexican Revolution. And I'm sorry to do this to y'all on the spot, but I wanted to kind of give y'all the opportunity to maybe share some aspects of the kind of like Mexican political tradition, or even Mexican Constitution, that like kind of speak to this more radical political history that exists in Mexico, because I do think a lot of people don't recognize the kind of more radical aspects of the Mexican Revolution. So I just wanted to kind of ask y'all, as interpreters to us gringos, what are some of these aspects of the kind of Mexican system or Mexican political tradition that American democratic socialists and socialists can maybe take some lessons from, or at least learn about?
Yeah, Mexico's constitution was written in the midst of that revolution, and it was, promulgated in 1917. It was at the time the world's most progressive constitution, and it still is one of the world's most progressive constitutions. In there's the right to education, the right to housing, the national possession of resources like oil, right? Water is a right. So handling a lot of social and also energy economic resources there. So it's a very long constitution, much longer than the U.S. one, and it really encodes a lot more in the way of social rights and, labor rights, and those haven't always been lived up to. But the fact that they're in the Constitution makes it very important because it's there as this kind of constitutional super law. Just one example, I can give you a lot of them that I think Americans and Canadians find interesting and strange when they come to Mexico, is that the entire coastline is federal property. You can't privatize a beach. Right. I grew up in Connecticut where there are 2 tiny public beaches along the entire coast and everything else is private beaches. And people are really surprised by the fact that the coastline is federal property and you can't privatize, which means that American tourists sometimes get upset because they can't be in their exclusive little tourist resorts along the beach side. And actually, one of the part of the labor of this administration and AMLO's has been to remove barriers for the Mexican public to access their own coast and their own beaches.
The thing I would add is sort of the rhetoric here is quite different, and I think allows us to have a wider political horizon. And the one that comes to mind is, of course, por el bien de todos, primero los pobres, right? For the good of all, the poor come first. To explicitly name the poor. When's the last time you heard a U.S. politician talk about the poor? To say that we have to actually gear our policies towards them, the most marginalized, the people who have been left out. And I think that is something that often is surprising to people, and it's a product of transformations, right? The reason that this political process here in Mexico is called the Fourth Transformation is because there were 3 that preceded it, that really kind of injected into daily political life a different conception of what politics is about. We don't talk about entitlements, we talk about rights. We don't talk about, social programs in the same sense. We talk about the redistribution of wealth. And I think that really does allow people to kind of think bigger and imagine more. And again, to talk back to this experience I had in Canada, the DSA co-chair, Grace Mauser, was there as well. And it was amazing to see how so much of that precisely is what she feels also helped really advance Zoran Mamdani's campaign, that it was something that was out of the norm for U.S. politics and resonated with people. I think if we see more of that, people adopting that, obviously adapting it to local conditions, you would see that people begin to imagine things quite differently, not necessarily within the constraints that the elites in politics and economics, they want to impose upon us as working class people.
Yeah, what really shaped, I think the difference between Mexico and the United States, right? We talked about Mexico having that revolutionary era 1917 constitution, is that Mexico didn't have the Red Scares the U.S. did. They just didn't happen, right? In the U.S., the first Red Scare after the First World War basically wiped out the Socialist Party, and the second Red Scare after the Second World War basically wiped out the Communist Party. That process never happened here. I'm not saying that has created, a situation where there are, massive socialist and communist parties. But the debate has been shaped by the fact that, it's like those Red Scares stunted the American imagination and stunted the acceptable realms of public debate in the United States in a way that just simply never happened in Mexico. So Jose Luis is right. There's a wider range of debate, and there's a wider range of definitions available to what, these movements are doing.
Yeah, and I mean, I think part of the reason that Claudia speaks so much to a kind of American audience is the language that she's able to use, the language of rights, of economic rights, and that kind of, however you want to categorize it, socialist, humanist, democratic socialist, what have you, the kind of language and rhetoric that she has, I think is something that is very unique, at least compared to American politicians. I will just note, fact, so everybody knows, Grace Mauser is the co-chair of New York City DSA, not national. But Jose Luis and Kurt Hackbarth, it is always such a pleasure to have you on the program. We will link for people to follow you on Soberania, also to Jose Luis's great work at Dropsite. Kurt is always writing for us here at Jacobin. Really appreciate both of y'all coming on the program, and we'll have to do this again very, very soon.
Thanks, Dave.
Anytime.
Well, Matt, always wonderful having Kurt and Jose Luis on the program, and also really, really wonderful being able to get that inside perspective as what's happening in Israel with the anti-war movement.
Yeah, Ido, I find really inspiring and daunting to think of being in a society with his values and living them out the best he can in the face of, frankly, insane jingoism. So it's great.
I mean, he's facing he's directly facing some of the most monstrous acts and unfortunately forces that you can imagine. And yeah, the courage really is inspiring. So really happy to be able to have that kind of conversation on this program. And this is one of the few places that you will be able to get that. So thanks everybody for subscribing to us. Please consider financially supporting Jacobin on YouTube. There's ways for y'all to do that. We've been seeing more and more signups even just since we started this episode. So thank y'all so much. We will be back very, very soon. Don't forget Myth of Red Texas. It is out. You can get it from OR Books. It will be available in bookstores on April 14th. Keep on spreading the word. It's been really wonderful hearing from all of y'all, and the support for the book has meant so much to me. Matt and I will be back on Left Reckoning next week. Check out the Majority Report. Subscribe to Jacobin. Appreciate all of y'all. Take care of yourselves and continue the fight, friends. We'll be back very soon.